Hey Church Home Youth, welcome to Youth Weekly Service. I'm so excited this month because we are actually diving into a book in the Bible called 1 Corinthians, and it's so good, and I'm excited for what I have to share today. Before we get started in that, I don't know if you have ever felt this way, if you've wondered this before, even when it comes to following Jesus. Maybe you're interested in learning more, but you've wondered, what does the Bible actually have to do with me? How is it relevant to what I'm going through in 2024 as a teenager, as a middle schooler, as a high schooler? I'm going through a lot, and when I read the Bible or when I hear about it and hear these stories, how is what happened 2,000 years ago actually relevant to what I've experienced and what I'm experiencing? I don't know about you as well, but I definitely feel like there are so many people out there that have opinions. They have so many ways to view the right way to live life. They have so many different podcasts and books out there that we can listen to, and it's almost like an information overload.
Circuit overload.
I feel that way all the time. I want to encourage you today, and I'm so excited to be honestly diving into this book because it is a book full of the way to live life when it comes to following Jesus and what it actually looks like to live this life. And I want to remind you as well, as Jesus followers, that we actually have relationship with the one who has the right way to live life. He's actually showed us the way to go about it, the way to handle situations. And even though this book seems old and ancient, and it's like, how can I relate to that? It's timeless. The message is timeless. Who Jesus is timeless.
His words still apply.
And so I'm excited to dive into this, and we're going to be talking about 1 Corinthians. I'll give you a little context before, because I've even talked with some of you guys who are like, okay, I don't really understand, like, when I read the books of the Bible, I don't totally know what we're talking about, and I've been there too. And so I did a little bit of research about 1 Corinthians, and a little bit of context is there's this guy, his name's Paul. So he's this prominent follower of Jesus back in these days in the Bible times. And God sends him to go share the good news about Jesus, share about his love and forgiveness to anywhere and everywhere. And so Paul ends up in this place called Corinth. It's a city of Corinth, which is where you get Corinthians from.
Makes sense.
He shows up there and he spends 1.5 years with the people in Corinth. He's a part of their community. He teaches them the ways of Jesus and really just builds and establishes the church there. So then once he's there for 1.5 years, he's like, okay, I'm gonna go now to more places. And as he's spreading the news other places, he starts getting these reports back about what's going on in Corinth, that there's some issues that are happening. There are some problems happening.
We got a big problem.
We'll talk more about what those problems are, but it's just not looking the way it's supposed to. And Paul realizes a lot of the people are not living out what they say they believe. They're not living out the forgiveness and grace of Jesus. They're not living out his teachings. And so he says, okay, I'm going to write this letter, we call it 1 Corinthians, and I'm going to remind them what they believe. I'm going to remind them who Jesus is. And so that's the context. It's this group of people that are just kind of going wild. They're kind of going rogue.
Pretty crazy, right? Pretty wild.
What I love about this letter especially is that it pretty much shows us, and Paul is showing us, that every single area of our life, every single aspect of our life, whether it's our friendships, our relationships, our family, our school, our work, our community, is really to be looked at through the lens of Jesus, especially in today's day and age. I mean, I know this was relevant back then. To me, I'm like, this feels more relevant than ever.
This is incredibly relevant.
Paul's ultimate goal in this is just to remind the people of Corinth, hey, remember, like, this is who Jesus is. These are his teachings. And so if you're an older sibling here, or if you're a younger sibling, you've probably had one of your older siblings tell you to learn from their mistakes. Or maybe your parents are like, I've been through it. Like, you need to learn from my mistakes. Like, don't go this way, don't go that way. And so when I was in high school, there was a new program that came out called Running Start. And it pretty much was where you could take college courses in high school. And when you graduate high school, you also have started college. And so if you did 2 years of Running Start while you're in high school, once you graduate high school, you also have completed 2 years of college. It was this crazy thing, but back then I was like, no chance. Like I want my full high school experience. I'm not going to do that. Like no way. And then when I got to like 20, 21 years old and I'm hanging out with some of my friends who did Running Start, they're like, oh yeah, like I'm literally done with college now. I've done all 4 years. And I was like, that's not fair. Like I should have done that.
What was I thinking?
And so I have 2 younger sisters and in high school, I was like, you guys need to do it. Like do Running Start, learn from my mistake, like do it. It's going to set you up. It's going to set you forward. And neither of them ended up doing it. And they both ended up regretting. They're like, man, I should have done it. Like you were right. I'm like, I know.
I told you so.
How often does that happen in our life where we can learn from mistakes, but no, I'm just not going to. And what I love about this book, Paul is telling the people of Corinth to learn from Israel's mistakes. Israel, back in the day, already went through so much of what the Corinthians are going through. So he's like, let's learn from their mistakes. Let's see what they did.
You're gonna get to learn from their mistakes.
And some of those things that they are struggling with have to do with what does it look like to live godly or live like Jesus in a corrupt culture, being unified without competition. So comparison was a really big issue in these days. Sexual and moral purity was a really big issue these days. And as you start to read what they're talking about in Corinthians that were issues in that day, it kind of sounds like what's going on today.
Sounds familiar.
And we often are in this cycle just as a world. It's just normal. Israel went through it. Corinth went through it. We go through it. We all are going through those similar things. And so Paul is wanting to remind the people of Corinth, remember what Israel did? Like, remember what they went through? They went through the same thing. So what can we learn from? How can we lean into Jesus? And so I wanted to share scripture with you guys in 1 Corinthians 10 that while I was reading this, I'm like, this one really, really stood out to me and I'm believing you're going to be encouraged by it. It's 1 Corinthians 10:13. It says, we all experience times of testing, which is normal for every human being, but God will be faithful to you. He will screen and filter the severity, the nature, the timing of every test and trial that you face so that you can bear it. He says, and each test, I love this part, each test is an opportunity to trust him more. I don't know about you, but sometimes a test, I'm like, that's an opportunity. Like, I don't want that opportunity, but it just is what it is. It's life. He says, every test is an opportunity to trust him more, for along with every trial that God has provided for you, a way of escape that will bring you out of it victoriously. And you hear that. And I love this because my first point of this talk, of this conversation, is that it's not just you. Every single one of us experience times of testing, as it says in that verse. It's normal for every human being, no matter what you believe. You believe in Jesus, you don't believe in Jesus. You follow a certain way, wherever you're at, we all are going to experience these times of testing. It's just normal. And I think often we feel like we're the only ones. Like I'm going through this.
Just feel alone.
And yeah, you might be the only one in your family at this time who's experienced exactly what you're going through. But what's so cool about the Bible and what's so cool about what Paul is saying is that you're not the only one. There's so many people out there. There's so many stories of people who followed Jesus, who went through similar things as you. And so you're not the only one. It's not just you who's going through it. And Paul also says in that, before he says that verse, he says, if it happened to Israel, it can happen to you. So just be on guard. So he's warning the people of Corinth, hey, those same struggles that Israel went through, we can go through them too. And we're starting to go through them too. And something that I was reminded of when reading this scripture was actually a story in the Gospels when Jesus is with Peter and he knows that Peter is about to deny him 3 times. And Peter, for context, also is like so close to Jesus. He spends all 3 years of Jesus's ministry on earth with him. He's so close to him. And Jesus even has to remind him to stay on guard. He says, Peter, I am praying that you don't give into these temptations. Like, I need you to stay on guard. If Peter needed to be reminded to stay on guard, how much more do we? We need to be reminded, hey, we all go through this. We're all in this together. We need to just stay on our toes.
Now be on guard, fellas.
My second point in this, which is the good part of it, is that you're not alone. You are not alone in this fight. You're not alone in these temptations, in these struggles, in these tests that we all face. because it says in that verse in Corinthians, it says, but God will be faithful to you. The test that you experience is an opportunity to trust God more. He's so faithful. He's provided a way of escape. And so what we can learn and how this is relevant to us today is that, you know what, the struggles I'm going through, God's actually going to be faithful. He's going to provide a way out. Those struggles could be, maybe it's at school, maybe you're just being bullied and you don't know what to do. God has provided a way of escape. That way of escape is for you to just trust him more and trust that he is doing something. He's going to work it out for good. That is such a promise. What I love with that story with Jesus and Peter is that Jesus tells Peter, I have been praying for you. I want to remind you that Jesus is advocating on your behalf. You're not just like, God is faithful and he is with you, and Jesus is praying for you. He's literally on your side. He's advocating you. You're not alone in what you're going through. And this strength that we find, this strength to go through these temptations, to go through these trials, to go through these tests that we experience is not just by, okay, I'm just gonna trust God more and I'm gonna try to bring my faith up. It's actually, I'm gonna rely on God and I'm just gonna fully surrender and let him do what he does. It's not our strength and it's his strength. And when I'm thinking about this and thinking about, okay, well, how does this really apply to me? How does 1 Corinthians, what they're going through, really apply to me? I think it would be so cool, and I've been encouraged in this too, but what would it look like if instead of in this day and age, in 2024, instead of just going to our favorite celebrity to see what they say about a topic or go listen to a podcast of someone that we really look up to, and I'm not saying any of this is bad, but what if before we did that, we actually went to the story of Jesus and actually looked at what he said, actually looked at the actions that he performed. Back in these days when this all happened, Jesus was known as a rabbi, which meant teacher. He literally is our teacher. He, yes, 100%, savior of the world. He has done everything for us, and he's our teacher. We can look at him and let him teach us with the way that he lived his life. Let him teach us with the way that he talked to people, with the way he handled situations. So what would that look like for you in your world? If you just started, okay, I don't know how to deal with this situation. I'm just going to go read the Bible. I'm just going to ask Jesus, will you show me, how should I handle this situation? How should I talk to this person who really hurt me? How should I forgive them? How should I help with my family? And maybe what does it look like for them to be restored, my parents to be restored? I don't know what your situation is, but what would it look like for you to just go to Jesus first before all of the other people in the world who have their opinions and, they're great. But what would it look for us to do that? I've been trying to do that a lot more in my life. I love to talk to my friends about what's going on in my life. And it's really easy for me to just call up and be like, oh my gosh, this and this. What do you think I should do? I've been trying really hard to actually just ask Jesus first. And it takes a second to get there, but ask him. He has the answers. He knows the way. And I want to just encourage you in that. What would it look like for you to actually just trust him and to go to him? And I want to encourage you with this one last verse. And I'm believing this over you. I'm believing this over me, that this is the way we're going to live our life. This is the way we're going to follow Jesus. It's in Psalm 119, which is one of my favorite chapters of the Bible. And it's David. He's saying this about God, and he's saying really just how he feels about who Jesus is. He says this, and I think this is really relevant for us. He says, how can a young person live a clean life? By carefully reading the map of your word. I'm single-minded in pursuit of you. Don't let me miss the road signs that you've posted. I've banked your promises in the vault of my heart so that I won't sin myself bankrupt. Be blessed, God. Train me in your ways of wise living. We can ask God to do that. Train me in your ways. I'll transfer to my lips all the counsel that comes from your mouth. I delight far more in what you tell me about living than in the gathering a pile of riches. And I love that so much too. He's saying that I actually care a lot more about what you say, God. And maybe you're listening to this and you're like, okay, I want to care more, but I don't necessarily care more. It's so much easier to hear from what my favorite celebrity is talking about. But maybe ask God. I would just encourage you, try asking God, can you help me care about that more? I actually do want to understand. Can you help me understand more? And then ends in this. I attentively watch how you've done it. I relish everything you've told me of life. and I won't forget a word of it. And we can do that, and we can do that. I want to do that. I want to look at the way Jesus lived his life. All of it's actually relevant to what we're experiencing today. Jesus, the message of his love and his forgiveness and his grace is timeless. And I want to remind you of that, to go to him, to learn from him first before we learn from everywhere else what they believe. And we just don't have to look any further. We don't have to go anywhere else. It's all right here. I got my Bible right here. It's all in here. Jesus is a part of it. And I'm just believing this for you. And I'm excited for the next part of these conversations as we continue to dive into 1 Corinthians. We'll see you next week.